Hey everyone, welcome to the Action Point. My name is Sam Sutherland, and this is my Calling Auckland first place Dash Inventor Extraordinaire Deck Tech. So, this deck is a hybrid deck. What that means is it has two main methods of play. You have a very aggressive boost package using starting item Techlo Pounder to get an extra 6 damage at the start of the game. And you also have the control package with induction chambers and plasma purifiers to grind out the game, and some defense reactions in order to keep yourself alive until the end game. In this deck, I have a very, very minimal weapon equipment suite. So Techlo Plasma Pistol, run this into every matchup. When you're going aggressive, High Octane in conjunction with Plasma Pistol is a really strong swing turn to have. So that's why I really enjoy having that over Hanabi Blaster or Talishar. Into, again, aggressive matchups, Goliath Gauntlet is really strong. An extra +2 on something, especially with something like, with an on-hit like Combustible Courier. That's very strong. Achilles Accelerator, just the best card to use. At minimum, it's an additional 2 damage at the end of the game by cracking it to throw another pistol shot. But at maximum you can get a free action point to play Spark of Genius, get a free Techlo Core, continue with your turn. You can also use Techlo Foundry Heart, an additional 1 resource every turn you would like to. As the deck is entirely Mechanologist, this will always hit. You just need to be careful of making sure you don't run out of deck too fast when you're going aggressive. But I'll go over some sort of things to look out for when you're playing aggressively, such that you'll use Techlo Foundry Heart in a way which is going to help your endgame, and it's not going to cause you to run out of cards too quickly. Finally, Crown of Providence and Visiatronic Model. As a default, you're going to be running Crown of Providence. This card is super strong because of its interaction with Maximum Velocity. Often you don't want to Arsenal this card, at least before Crown of Providence was released, because what Maximum Velocity says is you can only play this card if you've boosted 3 or more times this turn. Often that's a tough ask, and if you land this in Arsenal late game with no way to get it out, it will probably be stuck there if you're having to take damage to get it out and you don't have the damage to take. With Crown of Providence, you don't really have this issue. You can still get it out of there. You can still ensure you can create a turn with it. And yeah, it just becomes something that is really reliable to play. Visiatronic Model, don't worry about the action on there. It's purely there for Arcane Barrier 2 into Wizard. That combined with the Arcane Barrier 1 with your Achilles gives you AB3, which is all you really need for it. This sideboard is pretty tight. I have run Null-Rune Gloves in the past, but I felt like the additional D-Reacts is pretty strong into Guardian, and I don't think I could have won the Calling without them. So, reasons to play Dash in this metagame. The main boost package is just made up of generally above rate cards. So your main ones, 0 to 60, Zipper Hit, and Throttle, they all come in for what would be considered a better rate than most of other classes in the game would have. So 0 for 4 with Go Again, 1 for 5 with Go Again, 2 for 6 with Go Again. If you compare that with the Ninja starter cards, Head Jab, Leg Tap, Surging Strike, these are all 1 greater than that. Obviously, that comes with the cost of banishing your deck, but when you're going super aggressive like you are into Fi, that's not an issue. You also have some pretty key cards like Octane and Velocity to push really big damage on key turns, and you have a Techlo Core in order to set up for those big turns. If you have one of these out and you have one of these in Arsenal, you're pretty much guaranteed to have it the next turn. So yeah, that's a pretty good idea of how the deck runs and why you would be interested in playing it. Yeah, onto the aggro package. When you're playing aggro, you will be starting the Techlo Pounder starting item, and because of how tight this list is, you will then have a total of 59 other cards which will go into your deck. So if you decide to not play any of your induction chambers into an aggro matchup, then you'll have only exactly 59 cards in that deck. What this means is you will draw into your power cards like High Octane and Maximum Velocity faster. However, you won't have as many cards to burn away with your Teklo Foundry Heart and through the boost mechanic. If you are playing into a matchup which is not Phi and is not Kano, you need to be quite mindful of when you're deciding to Teklo Foundry Heart, because those additional banishes can add up and result in you fatiguing faster than you realize, or maybe even your opponent realizes. So be aware of that, and if your opponent decides to start full blocking you throughout the game, you need to be mindful of using your Foundry Heart less so that you can keep cards in your deck in order to still have threats. When you're playing full aggressive, key cards to look out for: Velocity. You really want to play this card. In order to ensure you play a Velocity, Teklo Core and Spark of Genius can really help you. If you play a Spark of Genius for 0, and you've boosted earlier in the turn, you'll be able to play out a Teklo Core, draw a card, and put that card into your arsenal. Or, if you decide to break your Achilles accelerators, you can play Spark, put out the Core, and draw another card, break the Achilles to keep going. This means you can sometimes even fix your hand with Spark while also putting out a Teklo Core free of charge onto the field. So Spark of Genius is very strong. You really want to see that, and you really want to aim to have a core out when you have Velocity in Arsenal. Because of Crown of Providence as well, and what that added for the deck, if you have Velocity in Arsenal, and you have Crown of Providence still active, you want to aim to ensure you can either play that Velocity using the Crown, or if it becomes late game and you feel like you're not going to be able to play the Velocity, having that Crown open to be able to cycle it out, free up your arsenal, draw a card. So this card is very strong at ensuring you hit Velocity, but always be mindful of the probability of what you're going to hit. So let's say you have a card, you have BIOS Update in your hand. It doesn't pitch for very much, and it doesn't boost on its own. Let's say you need a 1 cost or a 0 cost boost in order to resolve your Velocity. Using Crown in order to cycle that card out is often a very good choice, because there's quite a lot of 0 and 1 cost boost cards in the deck. I actually run every single one that exists except for Yellow T-Bone. So having all that accessible and having a look through your Banished and Grave in order to see what the probability of hitting that is often a good idea. Another key power card is High Octane. So in conjunction with your Teklo Plasma Pistol, High Octane allows you to gain a bunch of action points through boosting in the turn, and then shooting a pistol a few times at the end of the turn. What you're looking for when you have Octane in hand, or in your arsenal, is you want to have a minimum of 2 blue cards, or just generally a good amount of spare pitch at the end of your turn. So I like to think of it as two blue cards, but you might sometimes have to rely on what you're going to draw, and again that comes with the probability factor of, okay, I run 23 blues in this deck, there are an amount still in the deck, let's work out what's my probability of getting that blue card, and if you find it's a bit difficult or you can't sort of reliably get that, you might have to just arsenal the Octane, wait for a different turn. But yes, this is a very strong card, and it's the reason why I stick by Teklo Plasma Pistol. I'm always going to play Plasma Pistol into every matchup. Finally, Combustible Courier. This is one of your strongest cards into pure aggro, because what this card achieves for you is it rips cards from the opponent's hand, or allows you to just have an above rate throttle. 2 for 7 is super strong. And you can make this on hit even more reliable by, if you play this in the first 3 turns, it will get +2 from your Teklo Panda alone, so it gets to 6. You can break Goliath on this as well. So the first time you see this, feel free to just break Goliath on it, Combustible for 8 or even 10 can be backbreaking for a deck like Fi, because they can't really do anything to block it, or if they decide to block it, their entire hand is gone. So this is one of your power cards into Fi as well, so be aware of that. There are some matchups where you need to be aware of fatigue more than you usually do, such as into Reiner, you need to be aware of the fact that both they have a significant amount of 3 blocks in their deck. Usually their entire deck is 3 blocks. And they also have access to Arg Smash, making Reiner one of your hardest matchups ever. Into Reiner, it's a very tough game if they know that they can fatigue you. My very good friend, Patrick Watt, he's incredibly skilled at fatiguing me on that deck. At the calling, I got paired into him and managed to just high roll incredibly hard against him. But into that matchup, I run 3 additional induction chambers, and I actually start induction chamber into that matchup, because you need to be able to recur cards through your deck, whilst also pressuring the life total and being able to set up a huge turn. So in that game, I started chamber. I went first, played an extra pounder. Next turn, played another pounder. Next turn, played a core. And next turn, played velocity with both pounder effects. It was only after that turn that the Arg Smash came out, and then I then played another velocity, which meant that he was basically forced to block with it, and I was up a good amount of life with a good amount of cards left in my deck, which allowed me to really easily close out that game. But again, a Reiner playing correctly is very difficult to play against. Other matchups, into Briar I run 1 chamber. Into every matchup except Fi and Kano and sometimes Lexi, I run at least 1 chamber. So it's all a bit of a sort of a feel thing, what you think your opponent's going to do. If you know your opponent and you know 100% certain they are just going to aggro you, try and kill you before you kill them, you can just say, I'm going to take these out. And that's what I sometimes do at armory level events. I'm like, oh, this person's not going to run anything to try and block me out for the game. I'm just going to take this out, go full aggressive. But if you know someone's is on that plane, you might decide to up it from 1 to 2, maybe even 3. So into Levia and Reiner, it's 3. Into Katsu, I tend to run 2 because of how strong Flick Flack is and what that does for the fatigue side of things. But yeah, just be mindful when playing this deck of using your deck as a resource. Make sure to look over every now and then and go, oh, I've got 40 cards, yeah, I'm fine. 30, 20, it's getting low, down to 12, oh no. But yeah, induction chamber really is your way out with that. Onto the control side. This is how I like to slide into the control side of the deck as a general rule. What your main sort of goals in the control side of the deck are to survive until the late game, so essentially blocking a lot, and set up your pistol items such that your late game is stronger than your opponent's late game. So against most matchups, that'll involve having 2 induction chambers and 2 purifiers out on your field, such that you can attack for 4 with 2 plasma purifiers, 3 times each turn with 2 induction chambers, resulting in a total of a 12 damage turn using just 7 resources. What you're trying to do throughout the early game is to block with as many as your red and yellow cards as possible, such that they're out of your deck, so that in your late game all you have are blues left in your deck. So to help with this game plan, I have 8 defense reactions inside the deck. Unmovable is often your best defense reaction just because of how strong it is and how many blues you run. If that's in your arsenal and Dominate comes at you, this is an easy answer to it, and it becomes, okay, you've kept your whole hand so that you can Dominate Crippling Crush me. Here's 2 cards from mine, you've done nothing. Another important card is Reinforce the Line. I used to think this card was okay, not that great. Now my opinion of this card is it's incredibly good. Against CNC Pummel, this card is incredible. You just block 6. If they have Pummel, just use this, and they have gained no advantage over the course of that turn. Similarly, if you are attacked with an attack with Dominate, and you have this in your hand, you can still block with a card from hand, then reinforce it from hand, such that you're kind of blocking with 2 cards from hand, even though it's technically 1. Also throughout the game, you have Spark of Genius. In an aggro matchup, often you're paying 0 into this. However, when you're playing control, pitching 4 can often be your best bet, and you'll search out one of your pistol items such that you've got part of your late game setup. Now, how I decide to side into the control matchups often varies. It's sometimes a bit of a feel thing, just because it's like, oh, this feels correct now, and sometimes it's like, I'll decide to play like this. There's no set way of how I like to do things, but essentially I never want to cut lower than 20 blues. So I run 23, with 6 of them being non-blocks because they're items. So usually I'm down to 20 or up to 23, something around that range. In a matchup where I care about blocking quite a bit, such as Bravo, Dorinthia, Azalea, Arachne, something like that, I need to make sure that I cut some of these items because they can be quite detrimental in the early game. If I decide to do that, cards that I decide to put in are either High Octane or Pulse Wave Harpoon, just because I've taken out what I think are the worst cards for your control matchup, which is just underrate boost cards and velocity. But yeah, I might decide to put one of these in depending on what I like. Some things to bear in mind while sideboarding. Obviously, I've already mentioned it, you don't want too many non-blocks in the deck. It can be quite a game ender for you if it happens early game. Another thing is you want to be mindful of your non-attack action count. If you decide to put in 3 High Octanes and 2 Bios Update in your deck, you have 5 non-attack action cards in your deck. What this means is, if you draw these with Reinforce the Line, and your hand doesn't really have much else in it, you can have a pretty detrimental turn. Say your turn is Octane, Bios Update, a Teklo Core, and a Reinforce the Line. This has happened to me before, and this is all I can block with. I can only block for 6 because Reinforce won't apply to either of these, and Teklo Core doesn't block. So if someone's attacking me with, say, Rouse for 7 into Hammer for 4, I'm going to have to take 5 of that damage just because these cards don't block for me. So bear that in mind when you're siding into control, because, yeah, it can be game-ending. Into Oldhim in particular, I decide Octane should come out because I think having consistent Reinforce is very strong, and I think that High Octane often doesn't do a whole lot because of the interaction with Rampart of the Ram's Head and having to reload the pistol every time you shoot it. Into every other control matchup, however, I feel like this is a valid play to run 3 of those instead of your Pounders, because High Octane is still very strong. If you have 1 or more Purifiers out and you just decide, oh, I'm going to have a boost turn, and you haven't taken a whole lot of damage to do that, I would recommend doing that. But yeah, always bear in mind of what you want to happen with the game. So your late game is going to be stronger than the opponent's late game. Therefore, you blocking would extend the game and thus increase your odds of winning because you've extended the game such that you get closer to a point in the game where you're stronger than your opponent. So always bear in mind that even if your hand is stronger offensively, if you're being attacked, just block it. That's all that there is to it. So yeah, the matchups that you want to play control into are Bravo, Oldhim, Dorinthia, Azalea, and Arachne. Again, there's things to be said about each of those, and there are other matchups where you might think, oh, control is a better option, or there might be some of these matchups where you think, oh, aggro is a better option, and a bit of it's up to preference. Some of them, like Old Im in particular, it's like you should play control, otherwise you basically don't win. Other ones like Azalea, which is kind of on the fence for me. If you go boost, you're still probably not going to have too much of a bad time. But if they hit that dominated red in the ledger, you just like get time walked and lose a fair bit of tempo. But again, playing control into Azalea can be really tough because of things like Release the Tension, which means you can't play D-Reacts from Arsenal, and Remorseless, which has the same text on it. But yeah, otherwise, that's how you play the control matchup. Block early game, keep these for late game, set up some of these, and just block efficiently. I wanted to round off this deck tech by explaining a few frequently asked questions I've received about my deck and why I run it the way I do. So first off, 3-chamber. A lot of people have said, hey, you only need 2-chamber. Why are you running 3? And the answer is, yeah, that's true. I only do need 2-chamber to play out, to have an efficient endgame setup. The reason I run 3, as I've explained a little bit earlier, is if I am given up the opportunity to boost, say I'm going second, I get a throttle in hand, and I'm like, the best damage output of my turn is easily to play this throttle with go again. If I have 3 chambers in deck, and I'm playing against someone who doesn't run Rampart of the Ram's Head, I can boost the throttle, banish a card. If it's one of my chambers, I'm still fine, because then I've still got 2 in deck, so I'm happy to go with that trade. If it's one of my purifiers, I've still got 2 purifiers in deck, so I'm still happy with that, because I'll still get my 2 chambers, 2 purifiers in game setup. So, and if I hit a D-React, I'm just a little bit sad, but, you know, if you're going to play a pistol item out after that, it's worthwhile to break Achilles. But yeah, it's just more of a preference thing and the way I play that makes me say, hey, I want to run it like this. But again, personal preference. You run what you want to run. Next thing, 3 Teklo Pounder. The reason I run 3 is because of your fatigue matchups. As in, you're playing your aggro side of the deck, and someone is trying to fatigue you, which you may not know until you actually start playing. If someone tries to fatigue you, playing out Teklo Pounders and stacking them so that you have multiple out at the same time is exceedingly strong, because you're essentially playing a throttle. This is 2 for 6 damage. But the 6 damage occurs at a different point in the game, such that your opponent can't actually block it correctly. So if you can stack 2 of these, or even 3 of these, and then resolve a maximum velocity, the amount of damage you'll leak is just increased, which means you're less likely to fatigue in those matchups. Next, why do I run BIOS Update? BIOS Update is a very strong card. The text on it is, it gives your next attack +3, which is already quite strong, same rate as yellow 0 to 60 or red T-Bone. It also allows you to get a free item if you manage to banish it off in a turn. Over the course of the calling weekend, I got a free Pounder, I got a free Induction Chamber, and I also got a free Teklo Core. Obviously the chance is quite low, but when it does hit, it can be game winning for you. And it also is another one of the reasons why I run as many Teklo Pounders as I do. In a hand where you have also drawn maximum velocity, BIOS Update can be quite weak because it's a red and it doesn't boost. So often this might be one of your crown targets if you're in a hand that has maximum velocity and you could otherwise resolve it. And that's why I'm only on 2 of these, because I feel like 3 of these would reduce my velocity chances too much, and that is one of the main reasons I decided to play this deck. Next, why don't I run Magnetic Shockwave? Magnetic Shockwave is a card which doesn't boost, and for me that's quite relevant. I've had turns where I've needed a boost card off of the top with High Octane, and I haven't gotten it, and it's the card I've drawn has been Magnetic Shockwave, and I've been like, well, if this was any other card, even if it's the worst blue boost card in the game, my turn is still functional. And that's why I run Blue Combustible. This card is not brilliant, but it is blue, it does block 3, and it does boost. It also has additional application into the Dromo matchup. Say you hit an Ashwing or a Chromite or a Caloria with one of these, your next attack also gets +3, so your playline can be Caloria is dead, and then Pulse Wave for 7 at Dromai, or something like that. That play is quite strong into that deck, and when I consider Dromai to be one of my worst matchups, I feel like that's quite relevant. The additional effect on Magnetic Shockwave is rarely, if ever, relevant. I think I've only done it once or twice to take an opponent's entire equipment suite early game. And even then, it felt as though sometimes there could have been better lines. So that's the reason I don't run Magnetic. I just don't think it's that important a card to be running. Last thing, why don't I run Galvanic Bender? Galvanic Bender is obviously quite a good card. It is just Iron Rot, because I don't run Construct Nitro Mechanoid, but the one block on it that it provides can be very strong, especially into control. I even had a time in my match against Dennis Zhang where I had a fused Okanold coming at me, and my arsenal was Reinforce the Line, and I had an Unmovable in hand, and all I had was one block on my Teklo Foundry Heart. And I needed to block 9, and I couldn't do it because if I played this from hand and I blocked with Foundry Heart, I'd still take 1. If I blocked with an attack action card from hand and blocked with Reinforce and Foundry Heart, I still would have taken 1. And I can't block with both of these because this has no attack action card to apply to. However, had I had my Galvanic Bender, I would have been totally fine that turn. I wouldn't have lost tempo as I did, and things would have gone significantly better for me. But yeah, the reason I don't run it is because, as explained earlier, I have exactly 60 cards in my boost package. I don't have any room to cut that any further. I like to play 3 of each pistol item just because that's how I prefer to play this deck, and it makes me more comfortable going into those controlling matchups. Which leaves me with, if I want to put this in, one of the cuts I have to make is one of my 8 D-Reacts. So this comes down to a matter of, do I cut a D-React in order to improve my control matchup by putting Galvanic Bender in? Or do I keep my D-Reacts and still run Goliath? And for me, the conclusion has come to, I feel like just running Goliath and an extra D-React is better. However, I'm still not certain. So this is the way I felt has been best. However, still working on it, and I'm still making changes to the deck. Always, I think one of the marks of a good player is someone who is constantly editing their deck, making a few tweaks to it. Like every event they go, just make a few changes, see what you feel works best, and if you're like, oh, this deck is terrible now, you can just change back. Or if you'll be like, oh, there's some merit to this, you'll think this is better, and you'll change your deck, and you'll like it better because of that. So yeah, if anyone has any insights into Galvanic Bender for me and wants to convince me about it, please let me know. I'm very interested. But other than that, yeah. That was my Calling Auckland first place deck tech. I hope you all enjoyed, and expect to see a few more things from this channel in the future. Tane Evan and I have some good commentary about what the Melbourne scene is like down here, and we'll do some commentary on my top 8 games that were streamed, and expect to see more deck techs and just funny stuff from here later on. See ya!